I always thought if I could just erase one name from this neighborhood, I could erase the hurt it left in my life. If that little metal plaque disappeared from the park, maybe my chest wouldn't tighten every time I walked my old dog past that curve in the path. But that morning, in a cold little meeting room at City Hall, when they opened an old file and slid it across the table, right under the line that said, "Applicant for bench dedication, David Miller," was my own shaky signature from years ago. That day, it was that dry kind of early fall cold when the maple leaves outside City Hall have just turned the colour of burnt toast. I sat on a hard plastic chair, fingers wrapped around Rusty's leash, like it was the last solid thing left in my life. The meeting room smelled like cold coffee, old paper, and wool sweaters that hadn't fully dried. Up front, a crooked whiteboard said in thick black marker, "Public comment, park bench dedication, David Miller." That name sat there in big block letters like the whole town owed him a thank you. And there I was, 62 years old, hands freckled and stiff from arthritis, feeling every eye on my back even before anyone turned around. A young woman in a Parks and Recreation badge, Rachel, walked over and gave me a polite little smile. "Mrs. Marianne, after the comments, if you don't mind, we can go down to the records room. I think it might help if you see the paperwork on the bench." I nodded. My throat already felt too tight. I'd forgotten half of what I'd written in that email. I remembered the anger, though. I'd told them that bench with David Miller's name on it was an insult to the people he'd hurt. That not everyone whose name ended up on a public bench was a hero, that I wanted it gone. When they called my name to speak, my legs turned to wood. My knees cracked when I stood. The room turned and looked, old faces I recognized from the grocery store. The woman who knits on that very bench every afternoon, the couple with the little boy on the playground, the man who jogs loops around the park in the evenings. They all knew the bench. They liked the bench. They took pictures by that bench and wrote captions like "Love lasts forever" and "Our bench." I was the only one who looked at it like a wound that wouldn't close. I read from the paper I'd crumpled in my hands, my voice steady at first, then getting rougher. I said who I was, David's wife for 30 years. I told them about the nights I sat up waiting for his car, about the cold little speech where he announced he'd fallen in love with someone younger who made him feel alive. I told them that every time I walked past that bench, it felt like the whole town was on his side, and nobody remembered the people he walked away from. Some people frowned, some looked down at their shoes. Some shook their heads, and I couldn't tell if it was at me or him or just the mess of it all. When I sat down, my heart hammered so loud that the sound of the chairman's pen tapping the table might as well have been a judge's gavel on a coffin lid. They went on with the meeting, words like community service, volunteer work, symbolic value. I heard them and didn't hear them. All I could really see was that name on the whiteboard, coming in and out of focus like it was teasing me. Finally, the chairman said they'd take all comments under consideration. Chairs scraped the floor, people zipped their jackets, Rusty whined softly, ready to get outside. Rachel caught my eye and motioned for me to wait. We walked down a narrow hallway to a door marked Records and Archives. Inside, the air was cooler, full of dust and printer ink and that dry old paper smell. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, drawers labelled with peeling tape. 2010-2012 bench dedications. Donor files, park improvements. Rachel slid open a drawer, flipped through yellowed manila folders, then pulled one out. On a sticky note, it said, "Bench, David Miller." "Here we are," she said, laying it on the table. "I think it's best if you look yourself." I reached out. My thumb, the same one that wore a wedding ring for 3 decades, touched the edge of the folder. The paper was cold, even though the room wasn't. I opened it slowly, like there might be more inside than just forms and signatures. The first page was the city's standard form, big letters at the top, request for park bench dedication. Under it, the blanks were filled in neatly. Name of honoree, David Miller. Reason for dedication, for his volunteer work and commitment to the community park. My eyes slid down to the bottom of the page. And there, under applicant's signature, It wasn't the name of some Friends of the Park committee member. It wasn't a stranger. It was 2 words, slanted and familiar, like seeing my own face in the mirror after a nightmare. Marianne Miller, my signature. For a second it felt like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. My ears rang, my knees went soft. Rusty pressed his warm head against my shin like he could feel me tipping. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked softly. I didn't answer right away. A wave of memories I'd pushed to the bottom of my mind erupted like a lake surface when someone throws a rock in. A sunny afternoon, David's laugh, his hand on my shoulder as we talked about getting old together on our bench in our park. I stared at that signature and saw a different woman, 10 years younger, still believing in forever, still thinking the man beside her was solid ground and not quicksand. And standing there surrounded by dusty files, I suddenly wasn't sure anymore. Was I fighting for justice or trying to erase a part of my own life I'd once signed my name under? My name is Marianne. I'm 62. I live alone in a 1-story, grey-roofed house exactly 2 blocks from Maple Grove Park. If I walk slow with my coffee mug in hand, it takes about 12 minutes to reach the wooden sign that says, "Welcome to Maple Grove Park." Since the divorce, my world has shrunk down into those same few loops. House to park, park to supermarket, supermarket back home. Some Sundays I go sit in the last pew at church and let other people sing hymns over me. Every morning I wake up with my lower back and knees complaining. I make a weak cup of coffee, swallow my blood pressure pills, rub the thinning fur on Rusty's head, then shrug into my sweater and clip his leash. He looks at me with cloudy, loyal old eyes, like he's the only soul in that house who still says my name out loud. Maple Grove isn't a big park, but for people my age, it's a whole little world. There's the playground with the swings and slide, the walking path looping around a patch of grass, where the old men march off cholesterol every morning, and then there's that row of benches along the curve, facing the trees where the sun sets. David's bench sits at the prettiest bend. From there, you can see the sky go orange behind the maples. It used to be ours. That was 10, 12 years ago. David left our house on a winter night when Rusty could still jump all the way onto the sofa and shove his nose into David's newspaper. David stood in the doorway with his suitcase, talking like a TV character about needing to live his truth and feeling alive again. It sounded fancy, but the way he moved, quick, eyes skipping past our family photos, was just plain cowardly. When the door closed behind him, I heard his car start, then fade away down the block. Strangest thing, I didn't cry at first. I just looked around the living room, the chair he always sat in, the coffee cup he'd left on the table, his shoes he hadn't bothered to take. The emptiness in that room started at one corner and spread until it filled everything. I didn't cry until Rusty ran to the door, scratching and whining to go after him. Later, people told me, in those half-apologetic, half-gossipy voices, that David showed up at some charity gala with a woman almost 20 years younger than me. They said they looked glowing, meant for each other. I nodded and said I was happy for him, but every time someone used kind and David in the same sentence, my throat burned, like something was stuck there I couldn't swallow down. I found the bench with his name on it one spring morning. I'd taken a longer route than usual, trying to avoid the trail where I always seemed to bump into people who wanted to talk. I swung toward the little pond, past some new saplings. And there it was. The bench looked brand new. The concrete around its legs still had crumbs of dirt the workers hadn't brushed away. On the backrest was a shiny metal plaque, the letters cut deep. In honor of David Miller, for his love of this community park. I froze. Rusty tugged the leash, sniffing at the base, his nails clicking on the pavement. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the leash. Love of this community park. What about love of the woman who washed his muddy coats for 30 years? The woman who waited in hospital parking lots in the rain for him to get off shift? The woman who listened to all his stories and then, on the night he left, didn't even get a simple "I'm sorry"? No plaque for that. From that day on, my walking route bent itself around the bench. I'd turn right before the curve or pretend to be busy on my phone so I wouldn't have to look up and see his name. Sometimes laughter drifted over from that direction. I caught bits of conversation. "We have to get a picture on David's bench. It's the prettiest spot. I heard he did a lot for the park." Each sentence was another splinter. I didn't say anything to anyone, not at first. Then one afternoon, I was at the coffee shop on Main with my friend Linda, the only one who still dragged me out for a latte once a month. We sat by the window, watching the trickle of cars. "Do you still walk at the park?" she asked. "I do. I avoid the middle section, though." "You mean the part with David's bench?" she said, then winced. "Sorry, everyone in my street is talking about that bench. They say it has the best sunset view. I forgot." That little "everyone's talking about it," plus a couple of posts in the neighborhood Facebook group about the love bench, was what finally lit the fuse under that email. One night, after reheated soup and dishes done, I sat in front of my laptop. The blue light made my hands look older. I went to the city website and found contact. Subject: request to reconsider David Miller bench in Maple Grove Park. At first I meant to write a polite little note about mental health impacts and sensitive history. But the longer I typed, the more the words poured out, like somebody inside had opened a valve I'd been holding shut for years. I talked about being left behind, about 30 years of marriage ending with a suitcase and a speech, about walking past that name every day like stepping on broken glass. I admitted I was David's ex-wife. I didn't sugarcoat it. At the end, I wrote a sentence that now even I can admit sounded bitter and a little childish. "I do not believe a man who could so easily abandon his responsibilities to his family deserves to have his name engraved in public as a symbol of love for the community." I read the email over and over. Rusty snored under the table. Outside, the wind pushed through the fence slats and made a low, angry sound, like someone gnashing their teeth. Finally, I closed my eyes and hit send. I figured they'd ignore it. Or I'd get one of those canned responses. "We appreciate your feedback, however." I did not expect a polite email inviting me to a public comment session at City Hall, asking me to share my perspective. So that's how I ended up in that room with his name on the board, and then later in that cold records room staring at my own signature. I don't remember how I walked out of the records room. I just know that when the hallway door opened, the light from the end window felt like it stabbed my eyes. Rachel still had the file in her hands. "Do you want to take this home?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Leave it here. Old things belong in old drawers." Truth was, I couldn't imagine sitting at my kitchen table with that file in front of me. One little signature had knocked my knees out. A whole file might flatten me. At home, I dumped some stale store-bought cookies in Rusty's bowl and put the kettle on, not because I was hungry, but because at my age, you need small rituals or the house goes too quiet. Linda called. I knew she would. News in a small town travels faster than the flu. "Was it bad?" she asked. "The meeting?" "I don't know what word to use," I said. "Telling a room full of people about your cheating ex-husband is bad enough. Hearing them defend his contributions to the community, on top of that, that's something else. What did they say?" "They said they needed to see the paperwork. The Parks girl took me to records and—" I swallowed, tracing a crack in the table with my thumb. Turns out the person who requested the bench was me. Silence hummed on the line. "You," she said finally. You. Big old Marianne Miller at the bottom. My handwriting, my idea, my bench. Saying it out loud, I realized I wasn't just mad at David. I was mad at the woman who signed that paper. Mad at the younger me who believed so hard in a man who turned out to be so small. "Do you remember signing it?" Linda asked carefully. "I remember believing we'd grow old together on that bench," I said. "I remember talking about how we'd sit there and watch kids play. That's probably why I picked that exact curve. I probably even pointed it out to them." I let out a short, ugly laugh. On the other end, Linda sighed. Listen, Marianne, back then you did what you thought was right. That's not a crime. Now everything's blown apart and you're looking at that same bench with totally different eyes. That's not a crime either. You're just standing between two versions of yourself. I watched Rusty stretched out near the heater. He lifted his head like he knew my heart was heavy. But that email, I whispered. I said the person whose name is on that bench doesn't deserve it. And the person who put it there is me. It feels like I slapped my own face. Maybe sometimes we need a slap to wake up, Linda said, half joking. The real question is, now that you're awake, what do you want to do? That night I opened Facebook and went to the Maple Grove Neighbours group. Usually I just look at pictures of Halloween decorations and recipes. But there, pinned to the top, was a post. The city is reviewing whether to keep or remove the David Miller bench in Maple Grove Park. Thoughts? Dozens of comments. My heart sped up as I scrolled. Keep it. He was a big donor when they redid the playground. I heard someone with a grudge is trying to drag their private drama into a community issue. That's not fair. If that person's really hurting, I kinda get it. Walking past something like that would sting. I'd want it gone too. I don't know David outside the park, but I saw him serving hot dogs at fundraisers. Bad people don't do that, do they? A few strangers stuck up for the unnamed ex-wife, saying divorce at this age cuts deep and maybe folks should show some grace. But the comments about keeping personal business at home felt like little knives. I wanted to comment, that woman is me. I'm not a monster. I'm just tired of watching the world bow in front of a name that crushed me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I backed away. At my age, I don't have the energy for internet wars. Those comment battles go on forever. No one wins, and they don't fix anything inside you. I shut the laptop. The room dipped back into soft yellow lamplight. The next morning, I still took Rusty to the park. What else was I going to do? Stay home and listen to the refrigerator hum? At the entrance to the path, I hesitated. The right fork would let me dodge the bench. Straight ahead would take me right past it. Well, I told Rusty, we might as well face it. He just tugged the leash and sniffed the leaves. From a distance, I saw someone already on the bench. An older woman in a wool scarf with a little girl about 5 beside her, clutching a stuffed bear. The older woman pointed out toward the trees as she talked. I slowed down. As I got close, I heard, "Your great-grandpa liked this spot," the woman told the child. "He said the breeze was better here. They put this bench here because of him." The little girl's eyes went wide. "Great-grandpa helped the park?" she asked. "He sure did. He worked on the fundraisers and talked people into giving money. You can swing on that swing over there because of him," the woman said, patting the bench. My heart pinched. Great-grandpa, David, in her story wasn't the man who walked out with a suitcase. He was the man who grilled hot dogs and shook hands and talked people into writing checks. I stopped a few feet away, pretending to fuss with Rusty's collar. The woman looked up and gave me a warm stranger's smile. "Nice dog," she said. "I see you out here a lot." I smiled back a little. "Do you sit here often?" I asked. "Most days," she said, patting the seat. "My husband used to love this bench." "Your husband?" I asked. "He was David's brother," she said matter-of-factly. "I'm his sister-in-law. I figure you must have heard of David." I inhaled slowly. I could have said, he shared my bed for 30 years. Instead, I swallowed that down. "I've heard," I said. "I heard he did a lot for the park." "He wasn't perfect," she admitted, eyes wandering toward the trees. "There were things at home, but here, he did some good. I figure if folks want to remember that part, let 'em." If I had heard those words from anyone else, I might have bristled. Coming from her, they circled once and settled right in the center of my chest. He wasn't perfect. There were things at home, but here he did some good. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a cooling cup of tea and a storm of voices in my head. One from the woman I was at 52, sobbing next to an abandoned suitcase, and one from the woman I met on the bench, remembering her brother-in-law as someone who did at least one thing right with his free time. I didn't know which voice to pick. Maybe the truth was I had to learn to live with both. A few days later, I was out front watering my pots of mums when Rachel's city car pulled up. She climbed out with a big envelope. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said. "Not at all," I told her, pushing open the screen door. Rusty trotted up to sniff her shoes. We sat at the kitchen table. She spread some papers out. "I wanted to be honest with you," she began. "When I saw your signature in the file, I got flustered. I could tell you were blindsided. For what it's worth, I didn't want you to feel ambushed." "You were kinder than you needed to be," I said quietly. "You didn't write that signature." "I did." She shook her head. "I don't see it as a mistake on your part," she said. "My mum's your age. My parents split when I was 15, so I grew up in the middle of that kind of mess." She told me how their church kept her dad's name on a donor plaque for a new chapel after the divorce. Her mum would go to mass and see his name glowing under the lights. "Once she marched in to tell the priest to take it down," Rachel said. "He told her he may have been a poor husband, but that check still helped build this place. We can't pretend it didn't happen." "Mum cried all night," she went on, "but a few years later she brought me to that chapel and said, 'People can be more than one thing at once. One bad piece doesn't erase all the pieces, good or bad.'" She looked me straight in the eye, no judgment, just a sort of tired understanding. "I'm not telling you to forgive David," she said. "I'm just wondering, instead of tearing the bench out, could we change it? Let it tell the whole story, not just his half." "Change it how?" I asked. "We could add a second, smaller plaque underneath," she said, "not praising him, just acknowledging who helped put it there. You have the right to be named not only as his ex-wife, but as a person who built this park too." She slid a form toward me labelled additional plaque wording. On top, in pencil, she'd written, "Dedicated by his former wife Marianne, in a better time." I ran my finger over former wife, 2 little words, like a paper cut, like a door finally closing. It admitted the truth. I was no longer the woman beside him, but it also didn't erase that I once was. That night, I pulled an old shoebox from under the stairs. Inside were photos, cards, things I never managed to throw out but couldn't bear to look at. There was a picture of me and David at Maple Grove before the new playground was there. I was grinning, holding a bag of homemade cookies for the bake sale. He was in rolled-up sleeves, holding a donation sign. To anyone else, it looked like a regular middle-aged couple doing a nice thing, only I knew what I'd been thinking that day, how I'd still believed we were solid. But no matter what happened later, that photo is still real. That day existed, those cookies were sold, the bench came from that money. I set the photo down and picked up my pen. Shit eyes. On Rachel's suggestion line, I crossed out former wife and rewrote the whole thing carefully. Dedicated by Marianne, who once shared this view. I didn't want wife or ex on there. I just wanted it to say this. There was a woman who once sat at this spot and truly believed she'd share this view with a certain man for the rest of her life. In the morning, I brought it to the parks office. Rachel read it and smiled. "I like this," she said. "It doesn't sugarcoat anything, but it doesn't spit on it either. It's honest." The city scheduled another short hearing, this time to approve the idea. I signed up to speak first. In that same room, I told them I'd seen the file and realised I'd been the one to request the bench. I said I had been furious enough to want to rip the whole thing out of the ground. I admitted that for a woman left at our age, that fury was as real as arthritis. Then I told them about David's sister-in-law on the bench, about Rachel's story, about how a person can be 2 or 3 contradictory things at once. "I don't want to pretend David never did anything good for this park," I said, voice dry but steady. "But I also don't want to disappear from that story. If the bench is staying, and it is, I want my part of it acknowledged too. That's why I'm asking you to keep the bench and just add a small plaque beneath it. Nothing more." The room was quiet. I could hear Rusty breathing at my feet. One councilman, who I recognised from the canned goods aisle, asked, "You're sure? We could consider relocation." "I'm sure," I said. I don't want my peace to depend on tearing down something that makes other people happy. I just want the full truth written down, not the pretty half. They took a quick vote. The option to keep the bench and add the second plaque passed. No one clapped, but I felt something shift. Some people stopped looking at me like the bitter ex who wants to ruin a nice bench, and more like a person trying to crawl out from under her own shadow. The day they installed the new plaque, the sun was mild and the maple leaves burned red and orange. The city workers came with a little metal plate, no bigger than my hand, with the words I'd chosen. Rachel was there, and Linda and David's sister-in-law, and a handful of neighbours. Rusty flopped down under the bench, panting. When the worker screwed the plaque into place under the existing one, I stepped closer, under the bold line, "In honour of David Miller for his love of this community park." There was now a second, smaller line, dedicated by Marianne, who once shared this view. I touched my fingertip to Marianne. For the first time, my name was there, not hiding behind wife of, not in some file drawer, out in the open air on its own. Linda leaned in. "You know," she whispered, "I think this is the first time in 10 years I've seen you look directly at this bench." "I think you're right," I said. "And the funny thing is, it doesn't scare me anymore." David's sister-in-law came over and patted my shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "David wasn't perfect. You don't have to forgive him. But this bench, it's good for a lot of folks. I'm glad you gave it another chance." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, hearing David's name didn't make my chest seize up. A few weeks later, near sunset, I took Rusty for our usual walk. The park was quieter than usual. As I rounded the curve, I saw a man standing in front of the bench. His hair had gone mostly white, but his shoulders, the set of his back, I knew them instantly. David. Beside him stood a younger woman, his new wife, I guessed, holding the hand of a little girl. He was bent toward the plaques, reading. His fingers brushed his own name first, then dropped to the new plate. I hung back behind a tree. I didn't need to be any closer. I saw his shoulders still when he got to Marianne, who once shared this view. The younger woman asked him something. He shook his head and gave her a short answer. I couldn't hear the words. His face looked complicated, not proud, not crushed, just like a man being forced to remember who he used to be to someone else. He turned and glanced around. For 1 second, our eyes met across the grass. Rusty snorted and wagged his tail. I nodded once, small. Not a greeting, not forgiveness, just a simple acknowledgement. You were real, I was real, this happened. He nodded back. He took the little girl's hand, and he and his wife walked the path away from me, not toward. I watched them until the trees swallowed them up, and I realized my stomach wasn't twisting. My heart wasn't racing. When they were gone, I walked over and sat on the bench. Rusty hauled himself up and laid his head in my lap. From there, the view was exactly what it had always been. The grass, the trees, the sky going gold. We had shared this view once. That was true. Now it was mine alone. And somehow that felt enough. That night I turned on my computer and went to a forum Linda had sent me, where people tell stories about marriages and divorces and ask strangers, "Am I the a-hole?" I started typing. I said I was an older woman left by her husband after 30 years. I said that back when I still believed in him. I had requested a bench in the park dedicated in his name and helped pay for it. That years later, everywhere I went, all I could see was his name shining like he'd been some kind of saint. I told them I'd emailed the city asking for the bench to be removed, that I'd stood up in a public meeting and said he didn't deserve it. And I told them how it felt to open the file and see my own signature at the bottom of that request. I wrote about his sister-in-law, who remembered him in the good moments, about the parks worker whose mum had gone through something similar, about the second little plaque with my name on it, about watching him read it and then walk away. At the end, I wrote, I wanted to rip out a bench that I myself helped to put there, just because the name on it hurts me now. Instead, I chose to leave it standing and add my own name underneath, so the story is told honestly. Does that make me petty and selfish, or just an old woman who's lost a lot and is trying finally to claim a little piece of her own story back? I hit post and shut the laptop. Somewhere out there, strangers would decide if I was NTA or YTA. For once, I didn't really care, because for the first time in a long time, I'd look straight at the name, the bench, the past, the man who broke my heart, and the woman who signed that old form. And I chose not to tear anything down. I chose to carve my own name into what was already there. For a woman in her 60s, that feels like enough bravery for whatever time I have left.